What's up, guys? How we doing? That is like the most epic bumper video of all time right there. Little POD in church today just to get you ready for the Colts kickoff today. Hey, my name's Justin. I'm one of the pastors here, and I'm here with Curtis Painter. And can you guys help me welcome him to Hope City today? Well, if you are a guest with us today, so glad that you're here. And I asked Curtis a few weeks ago if he would mind being here today. As many of you know, if you're one of the 3 or 4 people in the crowd today that have no reference to football, Curtis is a former Purdue quarterback. Sorry about your loss yesterday, buddy. But he's also a former Colts NFL quarterback. And so as we kick off this Game Changers series and as we kick off NFL season, we thought, man, it'd be awesome to have him come in and just share a little bit of his story. And so, Curtis, I'm going to let you just kind of introduce yourself. I gave a little bit away there, but just I know you're married and, so just give a little background on who you are.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be able to come here and talk a little bit and tell my story as not as exciting as it is. But no, it was great, sitting down having lunch with you and kind of, seeing this different approach at the message. So I think it's an awesome way to approach it. But anyway, like you said, I grew up in Vincennes, southern Indiana, so I'm kind of an Indiana native. Went to Purdue, played 3 years here at the Colts. After the Colts, went to Baltimore briefly, and then there we go. Baltimore briefly.
We have an equipment manager
That's right.
here, so just swap that right out.
That's right. Good staff. But and then finished my NFL career in New York. I was out there for a couple years. So and married, and we live here in Westfield, so close, native to Indiana, and came back.
As we were talking, it was interesting because I was like, "Are you the only NFL quarterback to back up both Manning brothers?" And that's not correct. You're one of 2, though.
Yes, so Jim Sorgi did it as well.
Okay.
He was here and then had a year or 2 out in New York also. So yeah, it's a pretty small club, but I guess I am one of a couple. So.
Yeah. Well, as many of you know, Curtis backed up Peyton Manning for 3 years, and your first year in the league, you guys go to the Super Bowl, which that was pretty awesome, right?
Yeah, that's kind of the dream, and I think a lot of the older guys that were, on that team, the veterans, had to talk to us young guys, and it's like this doesn't happen every year. This isn't something like, don't get used to this. And it's so true. I was so lucky to be in that position my rookie year. When you look across the league, there's guys that have been playing, 10, 11 years that have never made it to that point. So to be a rookie, to make it there was a pretty special experience.
It's cool. Well, we're talking about this game-changing moments in life, and one of the things that inspired, obviously, this series is this idea that one play, one mistake, one thing in a game can change everything. And the same thing is true in faith. But I'll never forget, 2009, my family and I were living in Nashville. And it's sad for us, but the Colts go to the Super Bowl that year. And the halftime onside kick, right? I could just feel the momentum changing. Could you guys, as you're on the sidelines and the Saints do the onside kick coming out of the second half, we're up at that point, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And could you guys feel the momentum swing in that way?
Well, I think if anybody tried to deny it, they'd probably be lying. So, anytime that happens, it kind of, sucks the life out of you a little bit. But yeah, it's crazy. When you look at those things and how they can change the course of a game. I remember we used to always sit down and talk about statistics. And when you look at, there's a couple plays in the course of a game that if you have them happen, like a return interception for a touchdown or something on special teams, it's crazy how the percentage of wins goes up. And so everyone's always looking for, who's going to make that momentum play.
Right.
And yeah, it's crazy that it happened. You like to be on the other side of it, but
right.
But yeah, in even more recent news, you look at last year's Super Bowl and the touchdown pass to Foles that everyone keeps playing over and over. It may not have won the game, but it certainly swung the momentum in their favor and gave them a chance to.
We have one Philly fan here in the crowd. Tim Hunter's back at Guest Central. So, but we all can agree we all hate the Patriots. So I think we're all in the same boat there. So, one of the things that we talked about is, you come into the league in 2009, and then the 2011 season is probably one that you would like to forget, or at least not necessarily talk about. But Peyton gets hurt. He has the fusion surgery. At what point did you know, okay, I'm taking over? Like, was that going into training camp? Was that a like on your plate at that point?
Yeah, pretty much going into training camp. But yeah, you know, like you mentioned, it's certainly there wasn't a whole lot of success that year, you know, on paper. But you know, just learned so much about the game and you know how to bounce back and that sort of thing. But you know, when you look at that season, it's you know, growing up as a kid, that's the moment. Like you don't just make it to you know college or the NFL and just want to sit the bench the whole time. You want to play. So, you know, for me on a personal level, this is my chance. And you know, so it was tough. Certainly going through it and not having the success that you would like. But again, you know, you kind of learn from it. You learn from your mistakes, and I think it helps kind of build you throughout you know the rest of your career, my career, and then you know life afterwards.
One of the things that we talked about at lunch is just this idea that you felt not just pressure from the media or pressure from fans, but you had this internal pressure to do things like Peyton Manning did things. And that's a really hard standard to live up to. I don't know that any NFL quarterback could actually do that. Just talk a little bit about that idea of trying to fit, you know, wear his shoes, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it turns out he's pretty good. But you know, when I always tell people it's you know when you're sitting in the film room and you've got the game plan and you're going through it and you're watching you know the opposing defense and trying to dissect it. You know, it's easy to say, oh yeah, I'm going to throw it here, I'm going to do that, I'm going to check to this play. But you know, when you're out there and everything's going, it's a lot harder. And I think that's what made him special is he had the ability to do that and to see what the defense is doing and change, you know, with the snap of fingers. So, like you mentioned, that's kind of where I was. You know, in my head, I'm thinking I have to be like him and I have to do, you know, everything that he would do. And you know, it took a couple games for me to realize that I don't need to do that. I can throw, you know, a short pass to Reggie and let him, you know, do the hard work. So, so that was one thing I had to get through. But yeah, I mean, you know, looking at the NFL, no one means to throw a bad pass or miss a tackle or miss a block. It kind of happens. So just to get through those, you know, those kind of things internally was tough.
Yeah. How would you say, like, you know, your faith and your, you know, relationship with God, how did that intersect? I'm guessing because you have this dream, right, that's coming into fruition at the same time. It's not living up to what you expect it to be. So how did you kind of get through that season, just internally in your faith?
Yeah, I mean, well, exactly that. Just having faith in it. But you know, I was so fortunate to have you know that kind of year here in town with family and friends and everybody close by. But you know, I think I'm very you know, guilty of it. You know, when things are going well, you know, a lot of times it's easy to, you know, thank God and thanks for, you know, where you're putting me. But it's when things are going bad, often I kind of catch myself thinking like, why would you let this happen? You know, that sort of thing. So, you know, just having the the faith to just, you know, keep going. You know, it's not about the wins that he's helping me through. It's about the other things. So, I mean, it just kind of made it a little bit easier to make it through that season for sure.
That's good stuff. Last thought, like as you look back now over your NFL career, and I'm sure that, you know, that season, while it was, you know, stressful and really hard while you're going through it, I'm sure there was lessons that you've learned, not just from that particular experience, but just the NFL in general. Yeah. I mean, no one in this audience has played in the NFL. Like, you know, the percentage of people that aspire to be a professional athlete. Sure. What are some of the lessons that you took away from that?
I think what a lot of people don't understand about the NFL and the NFL organizations is how much of a business they are like. You know, whether it be, you know, timelines, you know, accountability and that sort of thing. You're making the game plans every week and preparing that sort of thing. But, you know, just, you know, the accountability, you know, going through some of the hard times and being able to bounce back because those are things that, you know, everybody deals with on a day-to-day basis, whether it's with your marriage or your work. You've got to go through some trials and just learn how to fight through those. And, you know, I think one of the greatest things for me and you know, my our marriage is when I was in New York, I'm away from her for, you know, months at a time. So I think that, you know, fortunately we went the right way and it just made us closer, which was great. But, and I think one of the other big things is I'm not as critical, you know, about things because, I think we're all a victim of it. We go to a restaurant or we look up a restaurant and we look at the Yelp reviews and it looks, okay, what are they saying bad about this place? So,
Right.
I learned to, kind of catch myself if I'm watching sports and I say, oh, why'd you throw that ball? And you kind of know, well, I know he didn't mean to throw an interception. It just happened. So I'm a little less critical, I think, which is good to me.
Maybe some people in the audience can take a little cue from you. Like, it's just a game.
Critical,
people.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, not be so critical today at 1 o'clock. So,
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. Well, can you guys help me thank Curtis just for sharing his story?
Thank you.
I love just the story of perseverance. I love just some of the truth that he just shared of adversity and how sometimes it's adversity that helps us take the next step in life, right? And the finish line for him wasn't retirement. That was just the starting line in so many ways of the life that God has in store for him. And so I love how his story is going to really intersect with what we're talking about today. So we're kicking off this new series called Game Changers. And after the service, we're going to have something fun. You may have saw the tent outside. We have Starbucks gift cards. Curtis is going to be out there throwing passes with an NFL football. And so if you can catch a pass beyond 20 yards, you get a $5 Starbucks gift card, all right? So you'll have an opportunity to catch a pass from an NFL quarterback. Should be pretty fun. There's going to be some pass, punt, and kick competition out there as well. Hopefully the rain will be gone by that time. And so we're going to have some fun after the service. There's a tent out there, so head out there after the service, and we'll have some fun with Curtis. Thank you so much for doing that for us. But Webster defines faith as this. It says, faith is firm belief in something of which there is no proof. And so as we talk about this idea that our faith changes everything, there is this abstract aspect of faith. That faith is something that you don't necessarily wrap your arms around in a tangible way. It's this commitment to something of which there is no proof. That's what Webster says it is. The Bible underscores that in the book of Hebrews. It says, now faith is confidence of what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. And that's the tension, isn't it? No matter if you've been in church for 20 years or this is your first time in church in 20 years, there's this tension that we feel as we try to grow in our faith that it is abstract. It's something that you can't see. You're placing your hope, you're placing your faith, no pun intended, but you're placing your assurances on something that you cannot see. And I know that all of us want to grow in our faith. All of us want to have a deeper faith. All of us want to have this greater commitment to our faith, but what does that even look like? And so can I just tell you that if you're here today and if you've ever had doubts in your faith, you've ever wondered if God existed, you ever wondered if God cared, if you ever wondered if God was doing anything in your life, if you ever felt like God was absent, if you've ever had any reservations about trusting God in deeper ways or giving God more of your heart, more of your life, more of your assurance, can I just tell you that you're not alone? That's the natural aspect of actually growing in faith, is wrestling with those things. There's this interaction that takes place in the New Testament between Jesus and this dad who has come to see him. Jesus is traveling through this town, and this dad is trying to get his son to see Jesus. And he intersects the disciples first. And the disciples try to heal this guy's son, but according to the Bible, they can't do it. They don't have enough faith to perform this miracle. And so the father, who's desperate to see his son healed, starts getting in an argument with the disciples. And it creates this scene in the middle of the street that Jesus becomes aware of. And so Jesus comes over and he interrupts this argument between this father and the disciples. And he says, hey, what is going on? And this is what the dad says to Jesus in Mark chapter 9. He says, have mercy on us and help us if you can. And I love Jesus' response. What do you mean if I can? So this guy is coming to Jesus. This guy has just seen the disciples try to perform a miracle that was not possible for them. So now the faith that he had in his son being healed is now a little shaky. And so he adds this disclaimer, have mercy on us and help us if you can. And Jesus is like, what do you mean if I can? Do you not know who I am? Anything is possible for a person that believes. And the father instantly cried out, I love this. I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief. And I think if we're honest today, no matter how long you've walked with God, no matter what type of relationship you have with God, that probably describes most of our life. Right? That there's this part of our life that we say, okay, Jesus, I really believe in you. And they're like, oh my gosh, I really doubt you. Jesus, I really know you're going to come through. Oh my gosh, God, are you really going to come through? I do believe in you. I do trust you with everything in my life, except for this, this, and this. Right? There's this aspect of our life. I believe, but help my unbelief. It's one of the most authentic statements in Scripture. And what I think has happened over the last 2,000 years is organized religion has complicated something that Jesus came to make simple. And that's this truth. I'll put this in your notes. That a growing faith is believing God more today than you did yesterday. If you want to know what a growing faith looks like, it's that simple. It's believing and trusting in God more today than you did the day before. That if you're going to be a person that's growing in your faith, if you're going to have a game-changing faith, it's simply, okay, God, am I going to give you more of my life today than I did yesterday? And I'm going to give you more of my life tomorrow than I did the day before. I'm going to give you more of my life the day after that than I did the day before. And it doesn't matter if you've been in church your whole life or if this is your first time in church in a really long time. That is what a growing faith looks like. It's simple, but it's not easy. Right? Trusting God with our life, it's simple. It's okay, God, here's my heart. Okay, God, here's my finances. Okay, God, here's my marriage. Here's my relationships. Here's my career. It's a simple concept, but it's just not easy to do. And that's why many of us desire a deeper faith, a more growing faith, a more alive faith. A month from today marks the 13th anniversary of when my wife and I's marriage imploded. We were separated for 2.5 months. We didn't talk for 10 days, and we didn't know if our marriage was going to make it. Many of you know our story, so I'm not going to go into that except to say that there was this desperate time where we hit rock bottom, where we didn't have the assurance that anything was going to play out like we thought it would. And it was this moment of realization that unless God showed up, unless God came through, unless God brought healing, we had no hope. On Friday, Trish and I were on a date day, and we were talking about just the realization of our marriage now, 13 years removed from our separation. And it's a convoluted, kind of conflicting feeling. Because on the one hand, I wouldn't trade in that experience, but I definitely wouldn't choose it again. There's this aspect that we had to almost go through that season of adversity and devastation and restoration to become the people that we are today. So I wouldn't choose it, but I wouldn't trade it in. And there's this complicated aspect of my faith. And as I've walked with God over 30 years, I realize that our faith and our relationship with God is often the same way. If you think about your relationship with God, there are probably moments in your life that you can look back on and you can see that it was through the greatest of adversity, the greatest of heartache, the greatest of trials that God brought you closer to Him. And we often think about that the mark of a successful faith is things going up and to the right, the things working out, things being in a good place. But most of us don't grow closer to God through times of success. At least not at the rate that we grow closer to God through adversity. And the principle that I saw play out in my marriage, that it was that adversity, it was that heartache, it was that devastation that caused us to galvanize our marriage and caused us to galvanize our relationship with God in a way that we had not up to that point 10 years into our marriage. And I think the same thing is true with our faith. The Bible even speaks of this. Look at 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 7. It says, these trials will show that your faith is genuine. It's being tested as fire tests and purifies gold, though your faith is far more precious than mere gold. So when your faith remains strong through many trials, it will bring you much praise and glory and honor on the day when Jesus Christ is revealed to the whole world. See, there's this aspect of faith that if your faith is going to be all that God calls it and wants it to be, it's not going to always go up and to the right. It's going to be tested. The way I put it in your notes is a tested faith can be a trusted faith. A faith that is tested is a faith that can be trusted. That as your faith goes through adversity, as your faith goes through hard times, as your faith is actually challenged, and as you wrestle with doubt, and you wrestle with cynicism, and you wrestle with questioning God, it's those moments that actually cause you to grow closer in your relationship with God, which is very counterintuitive. Trish and I do a lot of marriage counseling, and we talk to couples all the time, and inevitably, as we'll be talking to couples, one of us will say, well, so how often are you guys arguing these days? Like, just describe a normal week. Or do you guys argue a lot? I mean, how many of your conversations are not arguments? Just trying to gauge the amount of conflict in their relationship. And inevitably, one of the couples that we'll be talking to will say, maybe 1 out of every 5, 1 out of every 7 couples will say, oh, we never argue. We've been married for 7 years, never argued. We've been married for 9 years, never argued. We've been married for 22 years, never argued. And most couples that say that wear it as a badge of honor. And I'm just there throwing like the bullcrap flag. Like, I'm just like, there's no way that that's true, right? There's just no way that that's. Here's what happens. If you've never argued in a relationship that you're in every single day, somebody is either being walked on or someone is lying. Because you can't be in close proximity to someone and not argue with them, not have any conflict at all. In fact, I think it's God that leverages conflict in our relationship to draw us closer in our marriage relationship. And the same thing is true in our relationship with Him. See, God doesn't promise to save us from flames, but He has promised to walk with us through the fire. That's the truth of God's presence. That's the truth of how we grow in our faith. Look at Isaiah 43:2. It said, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep you over. And when you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. There's this assumption that as you walk with God, you're going to experience trials. In fact, God has them planned for you. He may not cause them, but He will leverage them. He may not instigate them, but He will use them. And so what I want to do today in the moments that we have left is I want to talk to you about a story that if you grew up in church is going to be really familiar. It's a VBS story. It's a Sunday school story. It's a story about 3 guys that literally walk through fire. And their names are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Their story is found in Daniel chapter 3. And we're not going to look at the whole chapter of Daniel because my messages have been going way over the last few weeks. And so I've been warned by our children's ministry staff, keep it to the time limit, all right? So we're not going to look at the whole book of Daniel. But I do want to talk about these guys that had this great faith in God, and yet they experienced one of the greatest trials anyone could ever experience. To give you some background on the story, the nation of Israel has been conquered by a country called Babylon. And the king of Babylon has exiled, kicked out of Israel, all of the Jewish people. And Babylonians have inhabited Israel, Judah. And he has kept behind some of the most gifted, some of the most talented, some of the best looking men to actually begin to assume leadership roles in the Babylonian royalty, in the Babylonian government. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are Jewish men. Most theologians estimate they're 14 to 18 years old. But they also are called the leaders of a Babylonian province. And so not only are they young, they're good looking, they're smart, but they are leaders. They are recognized by the Babylonian government as people who have gifts and skills that can actually lead people. And so the Bible says that they're overseers of a province in Babylon. The king's name was Nebuchadnezzar, and he was in charge, and he was evil, and not only was he evil, he was in love with himself. And the Bible says that at one point he decides to make this giant statue that's 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. Okay, so this thing is 30 yards up in the air, and it's made out of pure gold. And he comes up with this decree that every time music is played, this certain music is played, that everyone needs to bow down and worship the statue of King Nebuchadnezzar. And so they go through this whole thing, and they build the statue, they put the statue in place, and they're kind of doing this trial run of playing this music, and everybody bows down except Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They choose not to bow. And so the Bible says that these astrologers, these advisors to the king, who are Babylonian, come to him and say, hey, these Jewish guys, these guys that oversee this province in Babylon, they're not bowing. They're not worshiping you. They're not respecting you. And the payment or the penalty for not bowing was to be thrown into a furnace. That you were just going to be incinerated upon your disobedience. And so they come to the king and they're kind of agging on the king, like, hey, even though these guys are leaders, even though these guys have favor with you, even though these guys oversee a province, you still need to follow through. You need to throw them into the furnace. And so Nebuchadnezzar gets furious and he confronts Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And it says this in Daniel chapter 3, verses 4 through 6. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments, bow to the ground to worship the king Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will be immediately thrown into a blazing furnace. And so these guys, they know the routine, they know what's instructed, and they choose to stand in the face of great penalty, even the cost of their life. And so Nebuchadnezzar confronts them, and that's where we're going to walk through the story from there. And so I want to give you just 4 characteristics of game-changing faith, and we're going to see this in the story. The first is this: game-changing faith is more concerned with obedience than acceptance. So Nebuchadnezzar comes to him and he says, hey, don't you know the new law? Don't you know the decree that I've set forth? Don't you know that this is going to cost you your life? And here's how they respond in chapter 3, verse 16. It says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. The king was furious, and yet these young leaders were unwavering. Like, you know what? We have nothing to say to you. We have no defense. We're not bowing down to you. End of story. They were more concerned with their obedience to God than their acceptance by the king. When our oldest son, who's now a junior in college, was a freshman in high school, he came to a crossroads in his faith. He was on a travel basketball team that was really good. They were the number one team in the state of Tennessee. They'd won the AAU state championship, and so they played in a lot of high-level tournaments. And all these travel teams, if you guys are familiar with travel sports, you know that they just basically, it's just money grabs, right? Like they get you to this city, they play one game a day for like 4 days, and then you just have to go spend money in the city for the rest of your time there, right? And so they had played a couple games that morning, and Trisha was traveling with him, and they're at a mall, and they're just going to walk around this mall, and the plan comes to fruition that the players are going to go to a movie and the moms are going to go to dinner. And so they decide on this movie, and Micah looks at Trish kind of with a little bit of panic. And part of my story, part of our marriage story is I spent the first 10 years of our marriage addicted to pornography. And so that was a huge issue for our marriage healing, was for me to find freedom from that addiction. So we talked openly about it with our boys. We talked openly about it with Trish and I. It was a common understanding that we took this matter very seriously. And so we filtered the TV shows we watched. We filtered the movies that we went to. And so the movie that they decided to go to, Micah just has this panic look on his face because he knows that movie is not a good movie. So he comes to Trish. He's like, hey, Mom, I looked this movie up online. It's got graphic nudity. It's got a ton of sexual content. I don't know what to do. And Trisha said, well, you're going to have to make that decision yourself. I can't do it for you. And so he goes to the team and he says, hey, fellas, my mom, she really kind of high maintenance. She really wants to have dinner with me tonight. And so why don't you guys, go to the movies, and I'm just going to go to dinner with my mom. Well, Trish felt in the middle because she has all of these moms that are waiting for her at dinner. And so Micah says, hey, Mom, why don't you just go to dinner and I'll just go walk around the mall. And so here you have his whole travel team that's at this movie. You have Trish who's at dinner, and Micah's walking around the mall by himself. And Trish said she just felt horrible, and he said, Mom, I just know that the consequences of me watching that movie long-term are greater than the benefit of me going to the movies short-term. And there was this defining moment for him in his personal faith where obedience to who God was calling him to be was much greater than acceptance. And maybe your faith is plateaued today because you're more concerned with impressing people in your life than you are with pleasing God. Maybe this aspect of people-pleasing has got you making choices and decisions that allow you to fit in with people at work or people in your neighborhood or people in your family, and the obedience to God has kind of been put on the back burner, and you don't understand why your faith isn't growing. May I just suggest to you that once you start prioritizing obedience over acceptance, God begins to show up and he begins to grow your faith. The second principle here is that game-changing faith believes in spite of what it sees. Look at verse 17. This is how they respond to the king. He said, they say, We don't need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. And if we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power. And then they throw in your majesty. Like they have like a little respectful, title there at the end. Faith is believing in what is unseen. It's what makes faith so difficult at times to grow in, because you don't really have any assurances on this side of heaven that it's actually going to benefit you, right? You don't have any assurances that it's actually true at times. 2 years, next week, we were celebrating our 2-year anniversary, and this week I was filing some papers in our filing cabinet at home, in my home office, and I came across this document. And most of you have never even seen this piece of paper because it was created before any of you were around. 3 years ago, we were living in Nashville, and we put together this called a vision document. And it's basically just a document that we put together to raise money for the church. So I printed 500 of these. We mailed them to every single family member, every single friend we could possibly think of that would believe in this brand new church that didn't exist. And I would drive up here a couple times a month with a stack of these in my hand, and I would set meetings. I met with pastors of so many local churches here. I met with people that lived in Indianapolis that we were connected to. And I would sit down and I would talk to them about what Hope City was going to be, who Hope City was going to be. Indianapolis is the 12th largest city in the country. Its population is growing 50% faster than national average. There's 1.7 million people in the greater Indianapolis area, and 1.4 million of them are far from God. How can you not want to be a part of a church like that? I'm like, well, what's the church going to be about? Well, here's our core values. Here's what we believe. And I just kind of walk through this thing, and I'm like, oh, and it's going to take some cash. All right, so we need to raise about $300,000. And they were like, whoa. I'm like, hey, you got it. All right, we have all the money we need. It's just in your checking account, okay? And so I would just walk through this vision. And there was this call of who God had called Hope City to be that never even existed yet. There were people that were hearing about the vision of Hope City. On the back it says, hope changes everything, before you ever even had a place to go. Right? There was this predetermined belief that if we were faithful, that God would do something in our city. And you're here today because of people who sat through these little presentations over and over and over again. And there was this aspect of my life where I just thought, okay, God, I'm not asking to be successful. I'm just going to be faithful. And here's what I know to be true. Maybe there's an area of your life that requires faith beyond what you can see. And you have no idea what being faithful to that belief will do. Maybe some of you are in a marriage right now, and the easiest thing to do would be to walk away. The easiest thing to do would just be start all over. The easiest thing to do would just be separate. The easiest thing to do would just be file for divorce. And maybe God is saying, hey, would you believe in reconciliation that you can't see right now? Maybe for some of you, you're in this place in your career, and the easiest thing for you to do would be just to quit. The easiest thing to do would just be resign, to tell your boss off, to just go find another job. And God might be saying to you, hey, you know what? I'm not done with you there yet. And I know it's hard. I know it's frustrating. I know that you get up every morning and you dread going to work, but maybe will you trust me beyond what you can see? I'm going to do something through you and in you, despite how you feel about your company, despite how you feel about your boss. Maybe for some of you, your checking account is really weathered down and your savings is already depleted, and you have no idea how you're going to get through financially. And maybe God is just saying, hey, would you trust me to provide? Would you trust me to come through? Would you trust me? Have I ever let you down before? Why do you think I'm going to let you down again? Would you trust me beyond the dollars that you see right now to be your provider? Maybe for some of you, there's a medical issue that you're dealing with, and you're just completely discouraged. You're completely down, and your confidence is low, and you just wonder where God is at in this whole thing. Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's you personally. And maybe God is saying, hey, would you just trust me? Trust me, maybe not even for physical healing, but trust me to heal your soul. Trust me to work in your life. Trust me beyond what you can see right now with this diagnosis or with this issue or with this problem. Would you just trust me? Maybe for some of you, it's the loss of a loved one or the loss of a family member. And the grief just seems so overwhelming, and you just don't know how God is ever going to repair that part of your heart. And God might be saying to you, hey, would you just trust me beyond what you feel right now? Because you have no idea how I'm going to use this loss. You have no idea how I'm going to use this hurt to leverage and to grow your faith and to inspire other people to grow in their faith. See, faith doesn't take away the hard parts of life. It doesn't take away the confusing parts of life. It doesn't take away the unfair parts of life. Faith doesn't numb us to wounds or heartache. Faith is confidence in spite of what we can see. That's what faith is. Now, it doesn't mean that if you're in a bad marriage, and I just say have faith, that you don't have to date your spouse. You don't have to go to counseling. There's aspects of your relationship you're going to have to work. It doesn't mean that if you're struggling financially, you just go out and put everything on a credit card, right? It doesn't mean that you can violate the principles of God and still see faith come to fruition. It means that as you pursue God and as you implement the principles that God has for your life, then what you can experience can be way beyond what you can see. Third aspect is that game-changing faith realizes that we're in control of our choices but not the outcome. When I was working on the big idea for this message, this idea that faith changes everything, this two words came to mind, even if. And I wrote this statement in this prayer in my journal. I wrote, God, I want to have an even if kind of faith. And so as I started putting this message together last week, I just Googled, I just typed into Google, even if. And this story in Daniel came up. This is the first time I've ever spoken on the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that I can remember. Maybe in student ministry years ago, but never to adults. And that term, even if, is most prevalent. It's where this story kind of gets its meaning, because they go to King Nebuchadnezzar and say, hey, we're not going to bow to you. And Nebuchadnezzar says, hey, I'm going to incinerate you. I'm going to throw you in the furnace. And they say, our God can save us. And then they follow up with this statement. They say, but even if God doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you have set up. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say to the king, we know that God's going to show up. We know that he's going to come through. We know that he's going to save us. But even if he does not, we will never serve you. They were in control of their choices, but God was in control of the outcome. 2 weeks ago, our sophomore in college went back to school early because he got a job as an RA at Indiana Wesleyan. And so we were a little nervous about it because he had a rough year last year. Academically, he had a rough year last year. Relationally, he just had a rough year last year. And so over the course of that first week back, he had to go through this week-long of training where he was kind of 8 to 10 hours a day. He was in training to become this resident assistant, this leader in the dorms. And he has half of the floor, 30 guys, and another RA has the other half of the floor, another 30 guys. So there's 60 men, young men on each floor, and he oversees 30 of them. And so he's going through this training. About halfway through the week, he sends us this text message. And he says, this is classic Elijah if you don't know him. Hey, y'all, this is definitely more of a call thing, but I don't have time to call you. I have to do training. So due to some of my poor choices last year and me being obligated to report any offense against the code of conduct policy, I think I need to report myself to my boss and also the director of residential learning. I have no idea if I'll still keep my job or what ramifications will be. So I'm pretty much in a state of panic because I love my job and the community of RAs. So this situation just sucks on all fronts. That's a quote, okay? Don't email me. But I also know that as a student leader, obligated or not obligated, I need to set a standard to my unit and those I lead what integrity leadership looks like. And what that means is this: be praying for me. I'm kind of sick to my stomach of taking all these losses, but I am pretty much set myself up for it, and I'm genuinely okay with whatever happens. And as a pastor, I'm like, oh, buddy, that is so awesome. I'm so proud of you. As a dad, I'm like, oh my gosh, nobody's going to know, is that something that you really want to do? So there was this tension I was feeling for him. And I texted him back, Trisha texted him back, it takes tremendous courage. We're so proud of you. We'll be praying for you. This last week, Trisha had a phone call with him, and I talked to him yesterday, and he did sit down and he had an honest conversation with his boss, and his boss was blown away that he would confess and own up to some of these things that he went through last semester with honesty and a willingness to be authentic. And there was no ramifications. He didn't lose his job. And here's what I want you to know. He wasn't in charge of the outcome. He was only in charge of obedience. And if you want to have a game-changing faith, you have to realize that you're only in charge of your obedience. God is in charge of the outcome. And here's what's so interesting. This inspiring speech that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego give the king, hey, even if God doesn't show up, we're never going to bow down to you. He wasn't swayed by it. They were thrown into the furnace. They were burnt up. They were thrown into the furnace to be killed. Look at verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste. Oh, I'm sorry. So they were thrown in the furnace, and they did not burn up. Okay, God shows up, and this is what he says. This is his response to it. It says, then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king. Then the king said, look, I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. So this is the Old Testament. This isn't Acts. This isn't Ephesians. This isn't the Gospels. This is the first manifestation that I see, personal manifestation of the person of Jesus Christ showing up on earth. He shows up in the furnace with these guys. And here's the deal. God reveals his power in many places, but you'll know his presence in the fire. You can sense God's power in all aspects of your life, but when you're going through a fiery, hurtful, devastating situation in your life, that's when God's presence shows up most powerfully. God will show his power in all kinds of different ways through the course of your life, but you'll know his presence, his tangible presence, best when you're in the fire. And some of you need to hear that today, because you're in a fire right now. The king says, we threw 3 of those guys in there, and now I see 4 men loose. And I know the scripture says that they were unharmed. I know it says they were unburned. I know scripture says that their clothes weren't even singed. But I think there was something burnt up in the fire. Brandon, if you could go back to verse 25. It says, go back, Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he said, did we not cast 3 men bound? So they're tied up. Now go to the next one. I see 4 men loose. See, the fire did not burn them up, but it burned up what was holding them bondage. And maybe you feel like you're in a fire right now and you feel like God is punishing you right now, but maybe God is using the fire in your life to free you from what is holding you back from greater faith. Maybe God is saying, hey, you know what? I know that you feel like you're in a fire, but it's going to take the fire. It's going to take the refining. It's going to take this aspect of your life. You're going to have to go through this so that you can live free, so that you can live unhindered, so that you can live the life that I have for you to live. And finally, as we close, game-changing faith inspires others to believe. Look at verse 28. Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has set his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any other God except their own God. See, when you choose to trust God more, when you choose to believe in God despite what other people think, when you choose to be obedient regardless of the outcome, when you choose to walk through the fire knowing that God's presence is most powerful in the flames, you inspire other people to greater faith. And you have no idea what hangs in the balance. You have no idea what person in your family, what person in your company, what person in your neighborhood might be inspired, not by your perfect life, by your imperfect faith. When you say, I believe God, but help my unbelief. I want to be a game changer in my faith. I want to have a game-changing faith. And when you pray that prayer, God shows up and God frees you to be all that he has created you to be. Let's pray together.